I did not speak for 2 years and 4 months when I was a child. Not 2 years and some months. 2 years and 4 months exactly, which I know because my mother counted every day of it in a small notebook she kept in the drawer beside her bed, and which she showed me when I was 18 years old and old enough to understand what it had cost her. The silence started when I was 7 and ended when I was 9.5. And what ended it was not a therapist or a medication or a breakthrough moment in a clinical setting. What ended it was a Tuesday morning in April when I was sitting in the backyard of the house we rented in Gary, Indiana, and a neighbor's dog came through the gap in the fence and sat down next to me and looked at me with the specific quality of attention that dogs have when they have decided you are interesting. And I said, out loud and without planning to, "You found the gap." The dog looked at me. I looked at the dog. And then I started talking, and I did not stop for the next 40 years. I have thought about that Tuesday many times in the decades since. About what the dog had that the therapists did not. I think the answer is that the dog did not need me to produce anything. It was not there to help me. It was there because there was a gap in the fence, and the gap looked interesting, and on the other side of the gap was a boy, and the boy was interesting too, and that was all. It required nothing. And something in me, after 2 years and 4 months of silence, responded to being required nothing by finally offering something. This is the whole of what I know about selective mutism, from the inside. You cannot be pushed into speech. You cannot be coaxed or incentivized or therapized into it. You can only be given enough room and enough patience and enough of the specific quality of presence that asks nothing of you, until the moment arrives when you are ready, and the moment is yours to recognize and respond to. I know this because I lived it, and I know what it gave me, which is the thing I want to tell you about before I tell you anything else. If you have ever been the child who could not speak and grown into the adult who finally understands why, and found that the understanding is the most useful thing you carry, this channel is for you. Subscribe right now because every story here is for the people whose hardest years turned out to be their most important education. My name is Dorothy Reeves. I am 49 years old. I clean houses for a living. I have been doing this for 22 years, and I want to tell you something about this work that most people who have never done it do not understand, which is that it is intimate in a way that most professional relationships are not. When you clean someone's home, you are inside the private architecture of their life in a way that almost nobody else is. You know what they eat and how they sleep, and whether they are managing or not managing, and what they are proud of, and what they are ashamed of, because all of those things leave evidence in the rooms of a house. And if you are paying attention, which I always am, you read the evidence the way a careful reader reads a book, thoroughly, and without skimming the parts that are uncomfortable. I have been cleaning houses for 22 years, and in that time I have learned more about human beings from their rooms than I would have learned from their words, because rooms do not perform. Rooms just are. I am a single mother. My daughter Kezia is 25 years old, lives in Columbus, works as a sign language interpreter, which she chose because she grew up watching her mother communicate through the language of rooms, and chose a version of that work that uses the hands instead. She is the best thing I have ever done, and the reason everything else I have done has been worth doing. Kezia's father left when she was 3. I will not describe the leaving except to say that it was the kind that happens without warning, and that required me to become, very quickly and without any preparation, the only adult in her life. This is the fact of single parenthood that most people who have not done it do not understand, which is that it does not allow you to be tired in the way that people with partners can be tired. When you are the only adult in the room, every moment is a moment when someone needs you to be available, and the only choice available to you is what quality of available to be. I chose, early in those years, to be as fully present as I could manage, because the alternative was a kind of half-presence that I did not want Kezia to grow up in. This was not nobility. It was practicality. Half-presence is more exhausting than full presence because full presence at least produces something. I was fully present with Kezia, the way I had learned to be fully present in the silence, which is to say by setting aside everything that was not the immediate reality of the room and the person in it. This is what the silence gave me, finally, which is to say the silence gave me Kezia, which is to say the silence gave me everything. My daughter Kezia is 25 years old, lives in Columbus, works as a sign language interpreter, which she chose because she grew up watching her mother communicate through the language of rooms, and chose a version of that work that uses the hands instead. She is the best thing I have ever done, and the reason everything else I have done has been worth doing. I was 7 years old in 1983 when I stopped speaking. I want to tell you about the silence itself before I tell you about what broke it, because most people who have not been inside a silence like that one have an inaccurate picture of what it is. They imagine it as emptiness, as an absence, as the space where language used to be, now vacant. It is not that. It is full. A selective mutism is one of the fullest internal states I have ever inhabited because the language is all there, every word and sentence and idea and observation and feeling, present and articulate and ready. And what is not there is the ability to release it into a world that has, for reasons specific to the child living inside the silence, become a place where releasing it does not feel safe. The language does not go away. It accumulates. It builds pressure. And the child manages that pressure through all the channels that are not speech, through drawing and arranging and positioning and the quality of attention they bring to things. And if you know how to read those channels, you can receive from a silent child almost everything they would tell you if they could tell it. Almost. The part you cannot receive without the voice is the part that requires the voice, which is the person's name in another person's mouth, which is the proof that they have been seen specifically rather than generally, which is the thing that Iris waited 2 years to give me, and gave me at the moment of my departure. I know what it costs because I know what it took me 2 years to work up to, and what I felt on that Tuesday morning when the dog sat down beside me, and I said out loud, "You found the gap," was the same thing Iris felt when she said my name, which is the relief of a pressure that has been building for a very long time being finally and completely released into a world that turned out to be safe enough to hold it. I want to tell you about the 2 years and 4 months before the dog and the gap in the fence, because I think it is important for this story, and because I think the people who have not lived it need to understand what selective mutism actually is, as opposed to what they may assume it is. It is not stubbornness. It is not a communication disorder in the clinical sense of the word disorder, because disorder implies something broken, and nothing about me was broken. I was a child who had encountered something that I had no language for, and whose response to not having language for something was to stop using language until I found it. This is, when I describe it this way, a perfectly rational response. The problem was that the finding took 2 years and 4 months, and in those 2 years and 4 months the world around me interpreted my silence as malfunction, and deployed everything it had to fix the malfunction. And every deployment was an additional thing I had to manage on top of the original thing I was already managing, which meant that the silence got longer rather than shorter under the weight of all the fixing. I will not describe what the original thing was, because it is mine and Kezia's, and not part of this story. I will say that it was the kind of thing that happens to some children, and that reorganizes the landscape of what language is for, and that what I needed in those 2 years was not to be taught to speak, but to be given enough room to figure out what I would say when I did. Nobody gave me that room until the dog found the gap. I have been giving it to other people ever since. I want to tell you about what 22 years of cleaning houses teaches you about people before I tell you about the house on Meridian Avenue, because the teaching is the whole reason I was able to do what I did when the moment came. 22 years of entering other people's private spaces teaches you, above everything else, that the public version of a person and the private version of a person are related but not identical, and that the gap between them is readable in the rooms they inhabit when they believe no one is watching. I have cleaned houses for surgeons who kept their prescription bottles in the drawer beside the bed, with the labels facing down. I have cleaned houses for motivational speakers whose home offices contained the evidence of a paralysis that their platforms did not acknowledge. I have cleaned houses for mothers who kept their children's lost things in a box in the closet that they never opened and never threw away. I am not describing these things to expose the people they belong to. I am describing them because they are the evidence that invisibility, which is the condition of my work, is a form of access that most people do not account for and that I have used over 22 years to become the most well-informed person in any room I enter. What I do with that information is never to speak it. The rooms told me these things in confidence, and I keep the confidence. What I do with the information is use it to understand what a house actually needs from me, which is not always the same as what the person who owns it would tell me it needs. The house on Meridian Avenue in Indianapolis is a 9,000 square foot property that I clean every Wednesday and Friday morning, which means I arrive at 7:30 and leave by noon and cover the main floor, the second floor bedrooms, and the pool house, which is 3 cleaning professionals' full-day work compressed into 4.5 hours, which I manage because I have been cleaning this house for 3 years, and I know it the way I know all the houses I have cleaned for more than a year, which is to say completely, and without needing to think about where anything is. The house belongs to a woman named Vanessa Caldwell. She is 46 years old. She is the founder and chief executive of a healthcare logistics company that operates in 14 states and that has, by the general circulation of impressive numbers about impressive things that I absorb from the office correspondence visible on the desks I clean, revenues that would require scientific notation to describe properly. She is also the mother of a 7-year-old girl named Iris, who has not spoken since she was 5. And who is the reason this story exists. I want to tell you about Vanessa Caldwell before I tell you about Iris, because Vanessa deserves to be understood as more than the billionaire who tried to replace the cleaner. She is 46 years old, and she has built a company from nothing over 14 years, and she runs it with the kind of intelligent precision that requires you to make many decisions quickly with incomplete information, and to be right more often than you are wrong. This is a genuine skill and a genuine discipline, and I respect it without reservation. What it is not suited for is the specific problem of a 7-year-old who has stopped speaking, because the specific problem of a 7-year-old who has stopped speaking is not a problem that responds to intelligent precision. It responds to patience that has no deadline attached to it, and presence that has no agenda attached to it, and the willingness to be in the same room with someone who cannot give you what you want, and to stay anyway for as long as it takes. These are not the tools that build companies. They are the tools that build trust with someone who has decided that trust is not available, and they can only be learned from the inside of a silence, which is an experience that Vanessa had not had, and which I had had for 2 years and 4 months in Gary, Indiana, and which is the only reason I knew what to do when Iris's silence became my daily responsibility. I want to tell you what I knew about Iris before I knew anything about her, because what I knew before I knew anything is the whole of what mattered. I knew, from the first Wednesday I cleaned the house on Meridian Avenue 3 years ago, that there was a child in this house whose silence had a specific quality to it, not the silence of a sleeping child or a child who is absorbed in something, or a child who simply does not have anything to say at the particular moment you enter the room. The silence of a child who has made a decision about silence and is honoring that decision with a completeness and a consistency that takes, I know from experience, a great deal of internal work to maintain. I knew it the way you know a thing you have been from the inside. I recognized it in the specific way she positioned herself in rooms, always with her back to something solid, always with a clear line to the door, always arranged so that she could see everything that was moving without anything being able to surprise her from behind. I recognized it in the way she tracked movement in the periphery of her vision without appearing to, without turning her head, which is the attention strategy of someone who has learned that staying aware of everything in the room is the price of safety. I recognized it in the way she watched me, not with wariness, with assessment, the careful ongoing assessment of someone who is deciding whether a new element in their environment is safe or not, and who is taking as long as the assessment requires. I want to tell you something about the drawing before I tell you about the 10 months of following, because the drawing is the most important object in this story, and it deserves an introduction. Iris had been working on the drawing of the backyard since approximately the third month I was cleaning the house. I noticed it the way I notice everything in the houses I clean, which is completely and without making anything of it. It was a large sheet of paper on the kitchen table, and the drawing on it was detailed in a way that was unusual for a 7-year-old, with specific attention to the shapes of things rather than the symbols for things, which is the distinction between a child who draws what they see and a child who draws what they think a tree looks like. Iris drew what she saw. The oak at the back left corner of the yard was the oak at the back left corner of the yard, with its particular lean and its particular branch structure, not a generic tree. The stone border of the flower bed was the stone border of the specific flower bed, with the 2 stones that had cracked over winter and had not been replaced. She was making a record, not a picture, a record. The accuracy of it was, in the specific way that accuracy in a child is always a form of communication, a statement about how closely she was paying attention to the world she was in, which is to say it was a statement about the fact that she was entirely present even when she appeared to be entirely absent. I read the drawing for what it was, which is what I always do with the evidence rooms provide. I did not comment on it. I did not praise it. I simply noted it and went on cleaning. I did not approach her. I did not speak to her more than the ordinary good morning that I would offer anyone in a room I entered. I did not attempt to engage her, to draw her out, to communicate that I understood what she was doing or that I had done it myself. I simply cleaned the room she was in with the same thoroughness and the same pace as the room she was not in, and I did this for 6 months before she did anything other than assess me from the corner of her vision. What she did at the end of those 6 months was move from whatever room she was in to whatever room I was in. Not immediately, not dramatically. She would be in the playroom and I would move to the hallway outside it, and after a few minutes she would appear in the hallway. I would move to the top of the stairs and she would follow at a distance. I want to be clear that I did not engineer this. I did not plan to become the person she followed through the house. I just cleaned the house the way I always cleaned it, and she started shadowing me the way children shadow safe people, at the distance that felt right to her, which was variable and always on her terms. This went on for another 4 months. She followed. I cleaned. Nobody spoke. It was the most comfortable 10 months of my working life. I want to tell you something about the 10 months of following before I tell you about what ended them, because the 10 months are the heart of this story and they deserve more than a summary. What happened in those 10 months was not nothing. It looked like nothing. It was, from any observable external measure, 2 people moving through a house at different paces with no communication between them. But it was not nothing. It was the slow building of a specific kind of trust that cannot be rushed and cannot be manufactured and cannot be produced by any therapeutic technique, because it is not a product. It is a process, and the process has its own timeline which is entirely outside anyone's control except the child's. What Iris was doing in those 10 months was testing. Not deliberately, not strategically, but in the way that all creatures test a new element in their environment, by watching what it does under different conditions. She was watching what I did when I found something out of place, which is that I put it back without comment. She was watching what I did when I made a sound she did not expect, which is that I noted her response and adjusted. She was watching what I did when I was tired, which is the same thing I do when I am not tired, which is to do the work with the same quality regardless of how the day is going. She was watching me be consistent. Consistency is the primary currency of trust for a child who has decided that trust is not safe to extend, because consistency is the only evidence that a thing will be the same tomorrow as it is today, which is the minimum requirement for safety. I gave her 10 months of consistency without asking for anything in return, which is what the dog gave me in Gary, Indiana, and which is, as far as I know, the only thing that works. The thing that changed was not something I did. It was something Vanessa did, which she had every right to do and which I do not hold against her, and which I want to describe exactly as it happened because the exactness matters. Vanessa received a recommendation from Iris's current therapist that the household staff be rotated periodically to reduce Iris's attachment to specific individuals, on the grounds that specific attachments were enabling her selective mutism rather than challenging it. The recommendation was based on a theory about therapeutic exposure that is not without merit in clinical literature, and which I am not in a position to dispute professionally. Vanessa acted on it. On a Wednesday morning in November, she met me at the door before I came in and told me that she was going to make a change in her cleaning arrangements, that she appreciated my work, that she would give me 3 weeks' notice and a generous termination payment, and that she hoped I understood. I said I understood. I went inside to collect the few personal items I kept in the utility room, a pair of gloves, a water bottle, a small photograph of Kezia. Iris was in the kitchen when I came through it. She was at the kitchen table with a drawing she had been working on for the last several weeks, a detailed drawing of the backyard that she had been adding to incrementally each time I cleaned, and which I had been watching develop the way you watch something that is being built with great care. She looked up when I came in. I was carrying my things. She looked at what I was carrying. Children read the body language of departure the way they read everything, completely and without ambiguity. She understood. And then she said, for the first time in 2 years, with the voice of a child who has not used her voice in 2 years and whose voice has accordingly become tentative and thin, but is unmistakably and completely there, "Dorothy." Not a question, not a plea. My name. As if saying my name was the thing that needed to be said, and she was saying it before the opportunity closed. I want to be precise about the word she said because the precision matters. She did not say please or wait or no or any of the words that would have been a request or a protest. She said my name, Dorothy, which is the name of a person, not a function, which is the name you use when you want someone to know that you see them specifically as an individual, as the particular Dorothy who has been cleaning these rooms for 3 years and who has been in this kitchen every Wednesday and Friday, and who has been the quiet, consistent presence that the house has organized itself around without her noticing. She said my name with the voice of someone who has been saving it, which is what I believe she was doing. Saving it. Waiting for the moment that called for it. And the moment of my departure was the moment that called for it, because my name in that moment meant, I know you, I have known you, do not go without knowing that I know you. I want to tell you what happened in the room in the 4 seconds after Iris said my name. Vanessa was behind me in the kitchen doorway. I heard her make a sound, not a word, a sound beneath words, the sound of a mother hearing her daughter's voice for the first time in 2 years, and not yet having organized her response to it because the response had not yet found its form. I set down the things I was carrying on the kitchen counter. I sat down at the kitchen table across from Iris. She was looking at me. Her face was doing several things at once, in the way faces do when a person has just spent a great deal of themselves on something and is waiting to find out what it cost. I said, I hear you. She looked at her drawing. She looked at me. She said, you're leaving. I said that was the plan. She looked at her drawing. After a moment, she picked up a pencil. She added a detail to the drawing, something in the corner I had not noticed her working on before, and then she turned the drawing around and pushed it across the table toward me. It was a small figure in the corner of the backyard, a woman with a cleaning cloth, which is to say it was me, which she had put in the drawing without my knowing and had been adding to for weeks, which is to say that the drawing had been, for weeks, partly about me, which is to say that I had been inside the thing she was making with the most careful and attentive part of herself all along. I picked up the drawing. I looked at it for a long time. Vanessa had come into the kitchen and was standing very still near the counter. She was not yet speaking. She was reading the room the way a person reads a room when they understand that the room contains something that requires witnessing rather than managing. I want to tell you about the phone call 2 hours later because I think the phone call is the most important moment in the story after the kitchen, and I want to be precise about what Vanessa said and what I said and what it meant. She said I made a mistake, not I should reconsider, not I have decided to revisit my decision. I made a mistake, which is what a person says when they have sat with something for 2 hours and arrived at a judgment about themselves that is honest rather than strategic. I have cleaned houses for 22 years, and in that time, I have been on the receiving end of a very small number of genuine apologies from the people whose houses I clean, because genuine apologies require the speaker to accept that their judgment failed, and most people in the position of employing a cleaning professional are not practiced at accepting that their judgment has failed in front of that professional. Vanessa was practiced enough, or honest enough, or shaken enough by what she had heard in her kitchen that morning to say the true thing. I said the recommendation you received was not unreasonable. She said it was unreasonable in this specific case. I said, how could you have known that without the information I had? She said you had the information and you did not tell me. I said it was not my place. She said it should have been. We talked for another 20 minutes. At the end she said, please come back. I said I would. She did not replace me. She sat down at the kitchen table after I left that morning and she called me 2 hours later and she said, I made a mistake. I said, the recommendation you received was not unreasonable. She said, it was unreasonable in this specific case and I should have understood that before I acted. I said, how could you have understood it? She said, you could have told me. I said, it was not my place to tell you how to manage the therapeutic approach to your daughter. She said, it should have been. You knew things about her that I did not know. I said, I know. She said, please come back. I said I would. I went back on Friday. Iris was in the kitchen when I arrived. She did not say anything. She picked up her drawing and moved it to a different spot on the table to make room for my cleaning supplies, which is a gesture of accommodation, which is the most generous thing that children offer and which I have learned over 22 years never to take for granted. I cleaned the kitchen. She drew. Nobody spoke. It was exactly right. I want to tell you about the Friday I came back because the Friday is the resolution and resolutions deserve to be told. I arrived at 7:30. Vanessa met me at the door not to brief me, not to discuss what had happened or what would be different. She just opened the door and stepped back and let me in, which is the whole of what was needed. I went to the utility room. I put on my gloves. I got my supplies. I started with the kitchen, the way I always start with the kitchen. Iris was at the table. The drawing was in front of her. She did not say anything. She picked the drawing up and moved it to make room for my cleaning supplies, which is a gesture of accommodation, which is the most generous thing that children offer and which I have learned over 22 years never to take for granted. I cleaned around her. She drew. Nobody spoke. The room was what it was, and what it was entirely right. Vanessa and I have had 3 conversations since that Friday. Real ones. The kind that happen between 2 people who have stopped performing their respective roles for each other and are just talking. She told me about the 2 years of silence and what they had required of her, which was more than she had told anyone, because she had been performing competence about it in the way she performs competence about everything, and the performance was exhausting her. I told her about my 2 years and 4 months and the dog and the gap in the fence and the Tuesday morning in April. She cried in the specific way of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has just been given permission to put it down. She said, "What do I do?" I said the same thing I always say when people ask me this, which is the only true thing I know from the inside of the silence. You stop fixing it. You stop treating it as the problem. You treat her as the person and the silence as the weather, which is to say as a condition of her life right now that will change when it is ready to change, and that does not require your intervention in order to change. You sit with her. You watch her draw. You let the room be what it is. She said, "That sounds passive." I said, "It is the hardest active thing there is." She said, "I will try." She has been trying. Iris has spoken 4 more times since the morning she said my name. Not to me, to her mother. Small things, the way first things are always small. The size is not the point. The size is never the point. The point is that the voice is still there. It has been there the whole time. It just needed the room to decide for itself when to use it. Before you go, I want to ask you one thing. Is there someone in your life whose silence you have been trying to fix when what they needed was for you to stop fixing it and start sitting with it? I am not asking this to judge the fixing. I understand the fixing. When someone you love is silent in the way that Iris is silent and the way I was silent, the impulse to fix it is the most natural and most loving thing in the world. But I want to offer you what the dog offered me on a Tuesday in April in Gary, Indiana, which is the possibility that the most useful thing you can do right now is be interested in the person on the other side of the gap without requiring them to come through it on your schedule. Tell me in the comments. Tell me about the silence you are sitting with. Tell me whose it is. I read every single one and I would be honored to know. Hit subscribe if you have not yet. Leave a like so this reaches the parent who needs it tonight. And I will see you in the next one.